Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Friday, September the 10th, 2021. I see my profile picture has aroused some comment. I wish I could remember the name of the fellow who drew this caricature. And people were asking me about my previous thumbnail, which is a photograph, which is, 10 years old or something. So I thought that I'd go with something more contemporary. Warts and all. Quattro says, KMG, what was the name of the book where a Finn, Swede, Dane, and Norwegian escaped from Alaska down Canadian West Coast by canoe? Sorry, I'm not familiar with that. Not an appropriate public image for the president of my yacht club. I'm not really the yachting type, actually. Okay. Hello to Dionysus, William Hicks, Don Willis, Contiki Roulette, Dan Amron. And I was thinking about, well, one gets into controversy on Twitter and inevitably comes back that I'm old. Yes, I know that. And then I'm a boomer. Yes, I know that too. But I was thinking about this today. There are certain advantages to being old. There's many disadvantages, but there are also advantages. And one of them has to do with a knowledge of history. That I was born in 1955. My father was born in 1931, and his father was born in the 19th century. So, I can look back not that far and have an understanding about how people lived in the past, which is something that younger people or much younger people do not have. But of course, there have been enormous changes in my life, most of them not for the good. And I was reminded of a song by Ray Davis of the Kinks from the album Muswell Hillbillies, which is 50 years old this year. And I think it's the last great record they ever made. And the song is called 20th Century Man. And the bridge, the lyrics are, I was born in a welfare state, ruled by bureaucracy, controlled by civil servants and people dressed in gray. Got no privacy, got no liberty, because the 20th century people took it all away from me. You see, there's a trade-off there. That if you want to live in a welfare state, and the overwhelming number of people today want to live in a welfare state, that means you are ruled by bureaucracy and you are controlled by civil servants and people dressed in gray. Although they're not dressed in gray anymore. They're more likely dressed in lurid pantsuits and the like, wearing rainbow buttons. Got no privacy, got no liberty. Again, these go hand in hand with living in a welfare state. Because when one lives in a welfare state, the state quickly takes the view that the state owns you. In any country with socialized healthcare, the state very firmly lets it be known that your bodies belong to us. Whereas if you pay for your own healthcare, well, then you've got no one to assume that power over you. And so, when we talk about what's happening with COVID and the sanitary dictatorship, none of this should really come as a surprise. Now, if you know this song by Ray Davis, he asks, what has become of the green, pleasant fields of Jerusalem? Yes, you say, it wasn't all that pleasant before the welfare state for a great number of people. That's not really the point. The point is that Davis is, he's looking back to an ideal, what was once an English ideal, which is long gone. In fact, what it means to be English or what it means to be anyone is long gone now. It's been replaced by something different. If you look at another song by Ray Davis called Victoria, which is not about the city where I live, but is about Queen Victoria. And he sings, "I was born, lucky me, in a land that I love. Though I'm poor, I am free. When I grow, I shall fight. For this land, I shall die. Let her sun never set." Now, it's simply incomprehensible to us that someone could say without irony, though I'm poor, I am free, to us anymore. Nothing, really. There's a few people who believe in it, but they are a small minority. And all of the guarantees of freedom, which are contained in, well, the Canadian Constitution or the American Constitution or in the unwritten Constitution of Britain, have been swept away. It's all about egalitarianism or equity, which has replaced egalitarianism. It's all about harm reduction. It's all about really Procruste's bed, except for the 1% who are somehow exempted from all this. The only freedoms that we care about these days are the freedoms to take drugs and to have sex of any kind. Love is love. Remember? So, as I say, I'm old enough to remember an earlier time when the condition in which we find ourselves it just seems absolutely shocking, because it is. The idea that governments in my country could say, do this, don't do that, to such an extent that, oh, you're not allowed to leave your house. Or even that we were all bullied into banging pots and pans every night at 7 o'clock in the evening. This is the sort of thing that one expects from a totalitarian regime, but we are really not so far from that anymore. This song, 20th Century Man, again, was written in 1971, 50 years ago. Later in the show, I will be talking about Bernal Diaz's The Conquest of New Spain, where he is describing events that took place 500 years ago. And when I look at Diaz and Cortez and the Spanish conquistadors and what they suffered and what they accomplished, it's as if they are not members of the same species as us. One of the things that has changed enormously in my lifetime, and maybe in your lifetimes too, I suppose, is the idea of civics. What is it? What kind of behavior is appropriate? How does one present oneself in public? Is it permissible to sprawl with a bedroll in front of a shop or just somewhere in the street? And, well, the homeless people have rights. I suppose they do. But giving them their rights leads to certain consequences. And this leads me to a discussion of Dennis Dale, who's an old friend of mine. He is originally from Norwalk, California. He was in the Marines. He served in Okinawa. He worked as a helicopter mechanic. Then he worked in the aerospace industry, and after all the conglomerations and the layoffs, he found himself out of that. He lived in Seattle, well, Everett actually, for a number of years, and then a few years ago decided to move to Portland. And he has a blog called Untethered, which you can find at dennisdale.wordpress.com. And I really highly recommend it to you. He is nowhere near as known as Andy No, but he tells us with pictures what is happening on the streets of Portland. And from someone who knows Portland, well, back from the 20th century, it is absolutely horrifying because Portland is one of the most beautiful cities in America. And I was really struck by the quality of the place, that it seemed to have a certain, uh, well, it seemed to combine a kind of European ambiance with American efficiency. And now it is a place of, well, near continuous rioting, with the mayor deciding not to do anything about it, and the Multnomah County prosecutor deciding just to let all the rioters go, including those who continually try to burn down the federal building. And of course, the homeless, the homeless, the homeless, and the homeless. About a week ago, Dennis published a little true life story called Larry and Tonto. And I'm going to read it to you, just in the spirit of the way we live now. This is the part where I disappear into the night, I said over my shoulder, not intending to be heard. What? You don't want to ride home? No, I'm going somewhere else, I lied, all but running as I picked up my pace, giving in to an old familiar impulse to flee social awkwardness and its constant companion, dumb pride. I would navigate the 5 miles or so home at 2 a.m. rather than incur a favor and endure a conversation. Have you known the feeling? I realized I'd probably end up hailing a rideshare and might even converse with a driver. Dreading that wouldn't even occur to me. So I was about to pay a stranger to be a stranger, like the celebrity who said he paid call girls not to come over. That's not a problem, but to leave after. Needless to say, I'm no celebrity. I'm crazy. I made for the black shadow of an unlit parking lot across the street to more quickly pass out of view. The vaguely human outline of a pile of rags under which a man crept along turned toward me as I passed. Briefly, I saw a glint of eye there. Something shuttled across my path over the black ground, heading for a row of food carts. I relaxed and settled into my stupid decision. I've always done this sort of thing. The behavior is long set. Diligence is required in resisting it, and I've acquired some, or just calmed down with age. It happens more and more rarely, fading out like an echo. Still, it strikes with the old vigor sometimes and must be appeased with an occasional indulgence like this, paid like a tribute. My burnt offerings are Saturday nights, blistered feet, relationships. Sometimes I can only watch with dread as I act, noting it with a weird passivity and alienation, marveling yet again at myself. Front brain sits on the bow, arms crossed, shaking his head, glaring with familiar resignation at back brain, hand on the tiller and mouth agape in determined oblivion. Still, this isn't what I've come to tell you about. 2 blocks on, I peeked at the ride-sharing app, balked at the cost, saw the wait, pocketed the phone. Waiting 20 minutes in the windswept, it felt like fall already, boredom of the south end of downtown was unappealing. I preferred, if not the human contact, at least the presence of the degenerate denizens enlivening the north end. And you'll never know what you'll see. Something occurred to me. I patted myself down for a mask. I would need one to ride. That settled it. The nearest 24-hour outpost, a boarded-up fortress as a Chevron station at Burnside, would be my destination. I turned up 3rd at Market Street, overtaking and passing wide around a frail figure going my way when he hailed me. I stopped and let him catch up. He was walking as if falling forward on his stiff-bowed legs, which seemed to trail behind as they worked, feet splayed, barely bending at the knees, favoring a wasting lower back. He had over his shoulder what looked like a white sheet folded up and fashioned into a pack, tied bindle style at the corners and hanging from his shoulder over a clump of bags in his hand. Something under the other arm. When he came close, I saw a cat peering out through mesh with alert curiosity. At first, I wasn't sure he wasn't acting a little as homeless Will when he staggered up with evident exhaustion and presented himself, stooped at the waist in a perpetual bow. Can you help me find this place? He wheezed. His shadowed eyes were barely discernible, like a faint impression left behind on stone, imploring. A narrow face, narrowed further with age, tapered to the point of a wispy beard. He was winded. At points he would draw a deeper breath, groaning a little, inhaling, and rattling a little, exhaling. What place? His answer was hard to hear. I'm not sure it exists. It's supposed to be somewhere around here. He rotated his stiff trunk weakly to indicate the surroundings. Seeing he held a scrap of paper. Is that the address? Yeah, he said enthusiastically as I took it from his hand. I squinted in the dark. VA something or other scrawled over a legible address. The address was on my way, a good 10 blocks. 308 First. That's this way, I gestured north. Come on, we're going this way. What? He asked. Come on, I'll take you there. I waved at him a little more emphatically. He gave a little wheeze of surprise and fell in. He said his name was Larry. I don't remember telling him mine. I'm a veteran, he said. It didn't occur to me to tell him I was too. Then, I'm 66 years old. And a moment later, I was a minister. He said these things with a morbid enthusiasm offered like credentials in a routine pitch for relief. I didn't tell him how old I was. He was homeless, of course. I tried picturing the block we were headed for, a distressed nook near a commuter train station and rotten with homeless. I thought as likely as not the place wasn't there, but someone had written that address down recently before sending him on his way to happen upon me, and here I was assisting the handoff. Absently, I said, I think there's a Salvation Army there. I was a minister in the Salvation Army, he said with heightened enthusiasm, as if to reiterate what he'd said before. I was now confused, and it was hard to hear everything he said, but it sounded as if he were some sort of evangelical minister who spent time working with the Salvation Army. I didn't take him to be lying. Could it be that he had spent his younger years ministering to the needy, and now here he was? He struggled to keep up, and I struggled to go slow. He huffed and wheezed along periodically, cursing the effort, but each time I offered to stop, he insisted we press on, determined, giving out another tepid little curse. I think with his last hope destination so close and an unlikely guide at hand, he wasn't going to rest until he got there. You want me to carry the cat? I asked. Well, he's pretty heavy, he said, as if to politely decline, but he didn't resist when I gently lifted it from him. I could feel the outline of the cat through the soft fabric carrier. He was a good 12 pounds or more. The old guy laughed as I tucked him under my arm. See, he said. He complained things were getting worse on the streets. I'm surprised you stopped, he said. I can't get anybody to stop, not even the cops. They won't even talk to you. More grim enthusiasm. I said something about last year's riots and reduced police patrols. He didn't understand me. I made mention of it again, but he still misunderstood. I'm not sure he knows about the riots and the diminishing role of police here. The cat gave out a plaintive meow. I'm trying to position myself so he can see you as we walk, I explained. That's not it. He's just hungry. He won't stop till he eats. By all indications, the cat was eating better than he was. Nonetheless, he began his own periodic lamentations, miserable little meows. We arrived where First Avenue ducks under Morrison Bridge, where two rail lines take over the street heading into the IMAX station. Car traffic is banished and the street is brick cobblestone. A tent camp, of course, has taken over the sidewalk under the bridge. He hesitated. Come on, we're going up, I said. He didn't understand, but eagerly followed up the concrete steps leading to a parking lot at 2nd Avenue. We neared the top when a furtive whisper came. Hey, you got a lighter? Got a lighter? Turning, I squinted through chain link into the black wedge under the bridge where it made landfall. The voice seemed to be coming from behind a strung-up blue tarp. The old guy got a little spooked, letting out a hollow whine under his breath as I let him pass me to the other side. No, I don't, I said, taking a moment to decipher. An obese rapper wearing a crown 5 stories high, bearing an expression intended as pensive, looms over the parking lot. The king is back, declares the billboard promoting his new single, available on all platforms, Bussin', that's shooting back. Couple more blocks, I said. We turned back to First, and I was relieved to find the 300 block accessible. I scanned across the solid old brick building across the street for a number before landing on the sign over the door right in front of me, Veterans Community Resource and Referral Center. Here it is, I said. Nice. Is it? He said, hopefully. We crossed the train tracks and he set his bags down in the door's alcove, expressing gratitude it was empty. Where are you going to sleep? I asked stupidly. Right here, until they open, he said. Of course. Well then, now to find you some water. He'd been complaining miserably of thirst the whole time, and I'd promised him water. Where are we going now? He asked, discouraged, arranging his bags to hoist them back up. We're not going anywhere. You're going to rest here. I'm going to find you some water. There's a place nearby. He sighed in gratitude, whistling a little. I set down the cat. The chevron on Burnside is girded in plywood, like a lot of places have been over the last year. But it's the regular clientele, not Antifa, against which fortifications are sometimes necessary. You can no longer go inside the little store, I think because of COVID. The door has been fashioned into a sort of Dutch door with the glass taken or broken out and paneling over the bottom half. The attendant sells goods through it when he isn't pumping gas. His face is imploding, the homeless man at the window. His forehead tilts down and his chin tilts up like rock outcroppings being drawn into the sinkhole of his toothless mouth. His mottled skin is dotted with open red sores that match the red around and lining the white of his eyes. His body wobbles one way and his head teeters another, as if having no relation. His collapsing chin bounces back and forth. His face makes little circular motions, and his mouth works continually as if he's in silent conversation. The words bubble up as through a viscous fluid, and he's looking nowhere in particular when he says to the attendant, "I'd like one of those double breve lattes." What? Do they have an espresso machine in there? And he's ordering one? Now? What the hell? I nod, "Excuse me," to him. He appears oblivious. His eyes never look at anything when the attendant lets me go first. The attendant's facial expression and accent are both indecipherable. He gives me a Cheshire cat grin when he says he's out of masks. I think he's East European. The old guy didn't recognize me at first, squinting up at the figure hovering over him. "Here you go," I said, opening the liter of water and handing it to him. The cat was out of his bag, a couple of tins laid out for him. "Oh." He sounded surprised, recognizing me finally. "Thank you." He took the bottle in his shaky hand. Turning to the cat and filling one of the tins, he said, "There's some for you, buddy." I stood there for a moment. "Well, good luck." I set out on my second escape of the night. "Hey, wait a minute." I turned around and he was up and coming toward me, walking with a little more vigor and a little more upright with all the dignity he could muster, his bow legs and skinny arms angling outward as he moved. He brought his hand around wide to shake mine sharply, like a salute. "God bless you," he said, and I patted his bony frame as he pulled me close. I headed back in the direction and Old Town and then Broadway, still not sure how I'd get home. I wended through the tent camps, here and there stirring with life, if just barely, and then over the bridge, the silence occasionally and gently broken by the crashing wave sound of a passing car, and the city twinkling impassively and small behind. I was well past the bridge when I came upon another service station. Around the corner, a homeless camp had made a bonfire in the street. The maskless attendant gave me a pitying look as I approached with my shirt over my face. Nobody among the clientele, typically motley, as required of a gas station convenience store at the hour, was wearing one. "I don't care if you wear a mask," he said. "Where do you keep them?" "The mask. I need one to get a ride," I explained, embarrassed. Again, the wait for a ride was unappealing. The service station parking lot an ugly drag. A middle-aged black man was fiddling with some sort of antenna mounted on his van, while his slatternly white girlfriend brought out an armful of bright, shiny food product. And with the perverse, exhausted energy released by the evening, I decided to walk a bit more. I wouldn't walk all the way, I told myself. That would be stupid. And if I did walk 5 miles home for no good reason, I sure wouldn't tell you about it here. Now, would I? Again, that's a little true life story, a vignette of Portland life called Larry and Tonto from Dennis Dale, which you can find at his blog, dennisdale.wordpress.com, which I highly recommend to you. And let's go to the chat. Anron says, "To think Luke once both had Dennis and Kevin as regulars." Yes, I remember those days. Dennis Dale. Hello, Dennis. He's in the chat. "But it happened," he said. Is someone doubting it? Okay. "I owe you one," says Dennis Dale. Okay. William Hicks says, I must give Biden's speechwriters some credit. They didn't use the word parenthetically a single time, but they did put in that old nefarious cliche, let me be clear, which makes things murkier. KMG would king me like Chad would send along some Zepp covers of such. King me? I don't know what that means. KMG, born the same year as Glenn Danzig. Yeah, well, if you look at the punk rockers, the first wave, as I've noted before, almost all of them were born in the years 1954, 1955, or 1956. Oh, we're talking about famous boomers now. Are we? Edward Richardson says the thumbnail is awesome. Pass the victory gin. I'm not a spirits man myself. Jules Roy says, when I saw the Kinks at Maple Leaf Gardens in the late 80s, my first concert, Ray Davis was dressed entirely in a red tartan suit. Yes. Yes, indeed. I see Jules Roy is speaking up for word of mouth. I'll tell you about Ray Davis. He went through a lot in the 1960s. He became a big hit in Britain and America. And then he got into management problems with his management stealing him blind, and into record company problems, and in band problems because his brother Dave Davis believed that he was the real genius of the band, and he intermittently hated his brother, and he especially hated the drummer Mick Avery, who he would battle with, literally, on stage. And then the Kinks were banned from touring in America for, 3 years by the American Musicians Union for reasons which remain unknown to this day. And yes, he wasn't getting publishing money. He wasn't getting recording money, mechanical sales, as they call it. And his wife left him. And and also the band kept demanding hits. And I think he rather wore himself out. His last name is pronounced Davis. Yes, the E is silent on that side of the pond. At any rate, it's a Welsh name. Okay, let's get back to it here. Let's get back to it. Oh, yes. I have noted many times the similarities between the AIDS panic and the COVID panic. But of course, there are things that are not the same. A piece by Helen Andrews, who is always good in the American Conservative. She's the author of Boomers, which I highly recommend, which I did a review of on the book club. The piece is called Public Health Hypocrites. This is not how experts treated recalcitrants during the AIDS crisis. President Biden yesterday announced his plan to fight the coronavirus by penalizing the unvaccinated. Workers at companies employing more than 100 people will be forced to get vaccinated or endure weekly testing. Federal workers and contractors will have no testing opt-out. They must get vaccinated, a passport system, but you know that. Public health experts have lined up to commend the Biden plan. This is the height of hypocrisy coming from the same discipline that spent the AIDS crisis telling everyone that the real epidemic was stigma. The type of measures being applauded today were resisted tooth and nail when applied to AIDS, a much deadlier disease. In the 1980s, even mild non-coercive proposals like contact tracing to identify sexual partners who might have been exposed to the virus were condemned as portents of oppression. Contact tracing is a euphemism, warned Thomas Stoddard of the Lambda Legal Defense Fund. What they want to do is keep a list of sexually active people. Back then, the watchword was voluntary. I refused to blight my life in order supposedly to preserve it, wrote one correspondent in the New York Native in 1983 in response to the suggestion that gay men should cut down on casual sex. Just give me the facts and I'll decide. Thank you. The most famous AIDS public health controversy was over the bathhouses, as gay sex clubs in New York and San Francisco were euphemistically called. When city officials proposed closing them down as hotspots of disease spread, gay activist groups howled in outrage. The most important thing to remember about the bathhouse controversy is that it was not just activists who insisted they stay open. Federal health officials said the same. James Curran of the Centers for Disease Control was careful to explain that while he personally hoped that the bathhouses would close for lack of business, state intervention would be going too far. Even more egregious, because a greater corruption of science, was a 1984 study by CDC researcher William Darrow purporting to show no correlation between the bathhouses and AIDS. Quote, although numbers of partners and AIDS are significantly related, and men who go to bathhouses tend to have a greater number of partners, bathhouse attendance itself is not significantly associated with AIDS, unquote. The sophistry was so transparent that his superiors commissioned a second study to confirm the obvious that hubs of anonymous sex did indeed contribute to the spread of AIDS. But proponents continued to cite Darrow's study as scientific proof that bathhouses were fine. The establishment's emphasis on education and letting adults make their own decisions would have been easier to credit as sincere if their messaging on AIDS had been honest and informative, but it was not. The glib slogans were the worst. Sex does not cause AIDS. A virus does. There are no risk groups, only risky behaviors. It's not who you have sex with, it's what you do. AIDS doesn't discriminate. Everyone from Oprah to the Clinton White House parroted these slogans to discourage any possible victim blaming. These slogans live on today in fossilized form. Pick up any book by someone with a degree in public health and you will see what passes for expert orthodoxy on AIDS. The actions that fueled the epidemic were not condomless sex acts or shared syringes, but the laws passed and stigma dispensed by members of society who despised homosexuals, writes Emily Bass in her new book, To End a Plague. In fact, we know that AIDS struck the gay community not because of homophobia or happenstance, but because circa 1980, the majority of gay men had more than 100 lifetime sex partners and a third had more than 1,000. The only reasons for pretending otherwise were and are political. And that's the point. The dilemmas arising from COVID and AIDS are analogous in public health terms, and the establishment comes down on different sides in each case, based entirely on which groups are politically favored or disfavored. Gays lean Democratic, therefore they will be politely requested to wear condoms. Vaccine holdouts lean Republican, therefore we will revoke their right to hold a job until they comply. Yes. Oh, let's go to the late Charles Krauthammer, famous conservative. The whole point of such laws is to say this: it may indeed cause you psychological distress to mix with others whom you irrationally dislike or fear. Too bad. Yes, this was cited when he won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary in 1987. These particular prejudices are destructive and irrational. Therefore, the state will prohibit you, even in private sector transactions, such as hiring and firing or serving people in your own luncheonette, from acting upon your groundless prejudices. Yes, indeed. And I'll mention again that, well, I was working in talk radio at the time of the AIDS hysteria, and the World Health Organization was saying that, I don't know, by the year 2000 or something like that, or maybe even earlier, 105% of the world's population would have AIDS. I don't know how they arrived at that figure. And that it was everyone's disease. And I thought, the homosexuals are going to get it in the neck. But precisely the opposite happened, that they became more powerful than they'd ever been before. Why were they so powerful in the 1980s? Well, I have to believe that it was Crypsis, that a great many powerful people were secretly homosexual. And of course, the AIDS crisis led remarkably to the triumph of the homosexual agenda. But we see a similar thing with 9/11, which I will get to later. William Briggs writes, the solutions they had Biden mandate will fail. Here's how we know this is all rank nonsense in this country and others. Not one ruler or expert has said, here precisely using these verifiable metrics is how we know the crisis will be over. They wheeled Biden out to the microphone yesterday, and for what it's worth, they had him read things like this: expertocracy to require employers of more than 100 to mandate vaccination, even for the previously infected, or continuous for all time, forever, on and on until our Lord returns. Testing all experts in the bureaucracy and all contractors to be vexed. Workers in sick houses in the Medicare Medicaid system have to be vexed. Employers have to give money to employees to get vexed. Vaccine passports for entertainment venues. There are the conspiracy theory vaccine passports when they promised would never come, which are not strictly required, but they're on the slippery slope, which we have learned through hard experiences greased right down to the cesspool. Now, this is Briggs' opinion, not mine. I can't say that it's my opinion because, you know, what would happen then? According to Briggs, if you are vexed or unvexed and go along with the vaccine passports, you are part of the problem. If your entertainment is more valuable than your liberty, you deserve what you get. If you can't know by now how these will descend into further and more restrictive mandates for the doom or for many other things, you are either simple or deluded. Our patience is wearing thin, warns Biden about the unvaccinated. Oh, his patience is wearing thin. Alex Berenson writes on the speech that it started with a lie and didn't get better. Good evening, Uncle Joe told us. Evening, it was 5 p.m. in Washington and 2 p.m. in Los Angeles, near bedtime for our president, I suppose. In the 27 minutes that followed, Biden managed to choke out one fact. Over 1,000 fully vaccinated Americans were hospitalized with COVID every day this summer, which likely means the current number is considerably higher. How do I know? The White House spin masters, aided by the New York Times, are now resorting to calculating COVID infection and hospitalization risk for vaccinated people on a per-day basis. This statistic is so nonsensical as to be almost comic. Practically any risk will seem tiny over a single 24-hour period. To take just one example, a 90-year-old woman has a 1 in 8 chance of dying before she turns 91. But her risk of death per day is only about 1 in 3,000, not far from the 1 in 5,000 per day risk the Times has calculated for a vaccinated person to get COVID. So when Biden said the risks of being hospitalized with COVID, if you're fully vaccinated, are 1 in 160,000 per day, what he meant was that upwards of 1,000 vaccinated people are now being hospitalized every day, at least, because the vaccines work. That aside, the speech was what we've come to know as classic Biden, loud and empty in the style of Brezhnev or a late Roman emperor whose name no one knows. If he'd been really serious about forcing unvaccinated people to take the shot, he would have announced a vaccine requirement for air and other interstate travel and entry to federal buildings. Remember, he's required you to wear a mask to fly. He could at least try to force a vaccine. But whether because of airline lobbying or because he fears the Supreme Court is done with COVID nonsense, as it pretty clearly showed in striking down the ridiculous eviction ban last month, he didn't. Instead, he once again leaned on companies to do what he cannot, but only companies with more than 100 employees. To quote my 2-year-old, because why? The Roe don't care about small companies, I guess. But the plan does have one truly disastrous element, the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. The current hospital crisis has little or nothing to do with COVID, hospitalizations, vaxxed or unvaxxed, and everything to do with the fact that a large fraction of nurses and other medical staff would rather quit than be vaccinated. A fact all by itself should cause you to question both the seriousness of COVID for healthy adults and the usefulness of the vaccines. So yeah, last evening's speech was a lot of sound and fury, signifying nothing unless you plan to visit a hospital in the next few weeks. Good luck with that. At least he didn't mention Bo, though. That was a win. Let's go to Jim Kunstler this morning. The strange demeanor of CNN's newsreaders is telling us something. Check out Erin Burnett in the 7 o'clock time slot. No affect, like she is on drugs in a kind of trance or just going through the motions against her will. Same thing with Kate Baldwin. A sort of permanent half scowl, as if she's been told to carry out a detested chore, like cleaning the carpet where hubby's old dog had another accident. Is it perhaps that they just don't believe the bullshit they are serving up to anxious viewers anymore? Or is it something even darker? That would be my guess. Next thing you know, their heads will start rotating 360 degrees, projectile vomiting pea soup at the cameras. Kunstler continues, I surf through all the major cable news channels, of course, to detect the textures, flavors, and odors of the American zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. It's a harsh, sour things these days, with overtones of dead skunk wrapped in a used diaper and dipped in vinegar, almost impossible to choke down and process, like being trapped in a room where evil dwells in a bad dream. It's gotten so that some of us are beginning to wonder about actually living in the presence of true evil, as embodied, say, by Joe Biden, the ghostly figure said to be chief executive of the US government, but apparently in the service of forces and entities outside these 50 states. Old White Joe was back on TV yesterday issuing threats to his country persons. We are enthralled to a pandemic disease, you understand, this organism called COVID-19, and some 80 million of us have not availed ourselves of the magical vaccine required to prevent the transmission of said organism. We must take the vaccine in order to protect the people who already got the vax, many of them more than one shot, from catching COVID-19. Hold on now. You say they got multiple doses of the vax, but they can still catch the disease? Yes, they can, evidently. Okay, well, what kind of vax is it that doesn't keep you from catching the disease? Oh, a most excellent vax, and you must take it, or lose your income, forfeit your useful position in this economy, give up all the normal routines of existing in a free society. Then, this is no longer a free society? Oh, but it is, as long as you take as many vaxes as we can force you to take. And by the way, don't badmouth the vaxes. We'll find out, and we will deal with you. We'll come for you. We'll take away your access to banking. We'll sic federal agencies on your case. You will become a non-person, perhaps an unperson. There, that'll fix you. The pin on the national grenade I've been alluding to, I think Old White Joe pulled it yesterday. Something big is going to blow now. I'm thinking what remains of the American economy is what'll blow. You see, those 80 million of our fellow country persons remain unvaxxed for good reason. This vax has got a rather bad reputation. Not only is it largely ineffective, it can disable and even kill you. The news of this has gotten around despite the efforts of CNN and the New York Times to conceal it. The active agent in the vaccine, the spike protein, attaches to the endothelial linings of your blood vessels and provokes blood clots in them. It especially likes the capillaries and vital organs, the heart, brain, liver, kidneys, and so on. This is not good for you. Most adults of moderate intelligence understand that developing blood clots in vital organs is not a good thing. Many such adults in moderately good health might prefer taking their chances of getting COVID-19, wrestling their way through it, and coming out with full-fledged natural immunity superior to the iffy immunity the vaxes confer, combined with those bonus blood clots. There is also the matter of effective clinical early treatments for COVID-19 being suppressed by the government, the public health and medical authorities, and those dour babes on cable news. I speak, and I'm not going to mention these because I will get banned. But to continue, now something tells me, of those 80 million unvaxxed Americans, most have made up their minds pretty firmly about this. Joe Biden speaks from the head of a government that has been lying to them about, well, just about everything for a number of years. And this COVID-19 virus is one of the sketchiest stories the government has tried to put over. Tony Fauci funding development of the disease in a Chinese lab and elsewhere, the shady business around the vaccine patents and the royalties from the sales of them, the spooky VAERS numbers, the testimony of quite a few medical giants warning about the vaxes. This hesitant 80 million is probably going to take the sage advice of former First Lady Nancy Reagan and just say no. Out of good old American politeness, they may even add, thank you, no, thank you. If Joe Biden's government insists, the politeness may evaporate and our country persons will walk away from their jobs. Maybe not every single one of them, but plenty. Enough of them. Enough to make sure that many of the activities in America seize up, including hospitals and doctors' practices with nurses, technicians, and even some doctors walking away. Yes, you will be shocked to learn that even some American doctors still have an ethics module in their well-trained brains. Also probably trucking, so that things like food and auto parts and medicines don't get where they're needed, which is, let's face it, every place. That could harm the U.S. economy for sure, but it could also harm the administration of Joe Biden. Wait for it. The pin has been pulled. Watch the USA descend into a season of darkness and chaos. Then what? Redemption is a possibility. Patricia McCarthy at the American Thinker declares Thursday President Biden delivered the most insulting, contemptuous, and divisive speech by a president in U.S. history. We all know by now that Joe Biden does not care one iota about the American people. His life's work has been dedicated to enriching his own family, no more, no less. And like the rest of the left, he has contempt for any and all who dare to disagree with him. Yeah, and of course, something that is not being reported is that we know that the ethnic group most likely to be, as they say, vaccine hesitant is Black people. If we look at the figures for New York City, we can find out that not very many Black people there or anywhere else in the United States have been vaccinated. This is from Kane, a Citizen Free Press. Dr. Leanna Wen is the most dangerous woman in America. There are privileges associated with being an American, that if you wish to have these privileges, you need to get vaccinated. Travel, and having the right to travel in our state is not a constitutional right, as far as I know, to board a plane. If you want to travel, you better go get that vaccine. Why are Americans letting a woman from communist China boss them around like this? Of course, you could say the same thing about Canada, where our chief latrine walla is called Dr. Theresa Tam. Paper citizens, all of them, merely paper citizens. It's a story from the Daily Mail by Stephen Lepore. He said the quiet part out loud. Yes. White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain is facing furious criticism for retweeting a post saying President Biden's sweeping new vaccine mandates are, quote, the ultimate workaround, unquote, amid questions over their legality and whether they violate the Constitution. Well, the Biden administration has already decided to void a Supreme Court ruling on eviction. So, I don't know. If the Republicans had ever dared to do anything like that, it would have been the end of the world. Maybe they should learn a lesson from that. This is, again, from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Yes, Dr. Sanjay Gupta asked an interesting question of Dr. Fauci. Why Americans who've previously been infected should get vaccinated despite studies showing it's unnecessary. Quote, this is a direct quote from Dr. Fauci. I don't have a really firm answer for you on that. Yeah. They just do as they like. They do as they like, and I'm really getting the impression that so much of what they're doing because it makes them feel good. Not that they're doing it, it just makes them feel good. Almost an erotic kind of pleasure. And for all the people bleating, on Twitter, I'm fully vaxxed. They put it in their handles, get the vax, you idiots. They're enjoying this, and they've been enjoying it for over a year and a half. This feeling of terror, and they want it to last forever. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Research conducted by the University of California has found that teenage boys are 6 times more likely to suffer from heart problems caused by the COVID-19 vaccine than to be hospitalized as a result of COVID-19 itself. But they gotta get it anyway. They gotta get it anyway. Then again, this is from Summit News by Steve Watson. Senator Rand Paul responded to Joe Biden's far-reaching vaccine mandate announcement by stating that it ignores science and should be resisted by Americans. On Twitter, Paul said, vaccine mandates that ignore natural immunity, ignore the science, are unscientific, and should not be adhered to or promulgated by the government. Paul has been making the point for months now that indiscriminate vaccination programs are anti-scientific because they do not take into account natural immunity, which is a better form of protection than experimental vaccines. But nobody makes any money from it, and that's the whole point. Here's a blast from the past, from the Sydney Morning Herald, April the 27th, 2003. Sydney, of course, is a city, the largest city in Australia, which has decided to go mad and shut down the entire country over a handful, actually a real handful of cases. Yeah. Retailers who cash in on community fears about SARS, a previous respiratory virus, by exaggerating the health benefits of surgical masks could face fines of up to $110,000. New South Wales Fair Trading Minister Reba Marr yesterday warned that distributors and traders could be prosecuted if it was suggested that masks offered unrealistic levels of protection from the disease. Can we have some more details on that? These masks are effective only so long as they are dry, said Professor Yvonne Cossart of the Department of Infectious Diseases at the University of Sydney. As soon as they become saturated with the moisture in your breath, they stop doing their job and pass on the droplets. Professor Cossart said that could take as little as 15 or 20 minutes, after which the mask would need to be changed. But those warnings haven't stopped people snapping up the masks, with retailers reporting they are having trouble keeping up with demand. Well, my mask, cloth mask, is now, 13 months old. I believed I have washed it once, but just I can feel the moisture. I can feel the moisture in it, and I don't wear a mask. I wear a mask only when necessary, when I go indoors, and then, when I get to my room or I go outside to take it off immediately, but I can still feel the wetness, and then I'm breathing in more carbon dioxide, which is not good for you. But mask, you just gotta wear the masks. Again, Steve Watson, Summit News. Former FDA head and current Pfizer board member Scott Gottlieb, that's Dr. Scott Gottlieb, reacted to further revelations this week regarding the funding of dangerous gain-of-function research by Anthony Fauci, noting a previously unknown fact has emerged that lab tampering was undertaken on MERS-like coronaviruses, which are even deadlier than their SARS-like relatives. Gottlieb noted the documents obtained under FOIA also show that the viruses were made more deadly to humans in several labs around Wuhan, including a level 3 biocontainment facility, which has less security than the level 4 labs previously mentioned in relation to the outbreak. Whether or not this was gain of function is a political and legal decision, Gottlieb said in an interview with CNBC. The bottom line is they were doing research on viruses in that institute that was making those viruses potentially more dangerous to humans and handling the viruses in ways that could potentiate their release, particularly by infecting transgenic animals that have fully humanized immune systems. They were doing things in that lab that could have led to circumstances where a virus that was purposely evolved in ways that could be more dangerous to humans could have escaped. Again, I must say this. How has this not been shut down completely? I mean, we can't control what China does. Of course, there's ways we could put pressure on China. These are Dr. Frankenstein-like experiments. Only he created a monster, which could kill a few children and villagers or whatever. What these people are doing are creating things which could kill everyone on Earth. But no, mustn't interfere with the science. I want every single person involved in this, from Fauci on down, and including the people in my own country who were hushing up what we were doing in a lab in Winnipeg and inviting communist Chinese over here to help us, make diseases more virulent. I want all of these people broken. But I guess we'll have to wait for that to happen. Rick Fuentes has a piece in American Thinker called Becoming a COVID Apartheid. And he points out, of course, that, yes, it's Black people, most of all, who do not want to get vaccinated. And, of course, if you know of the Tuskegee Institute syphilis experiment, it gives you kind of an understanding of why Black people might be hesitant about getting the jab. Oh, they're panicking in Alberta again. This is from Kevin Mayman at Vice News. Alberta acted like COVID was over. Now its healthcare system is on the brink of collapse. Alberta has canceled all elective surgeries in the Calgary region as COVID-19 hospitalizations soar. Big deal. That's their decision. One of my brothers almost died last year because the hospitals in Calgary were not accepting any patients who did not have COVID-19. And this ban was lifted, I think, in June of last year. And he was told that if he had come in to the hospital a day later, he would have died. Or if he hadn't been allowed in the hospital, he would have died. And the hospital was almost empty. It was almost empty. These hospital administrators, they do what they like. You shouldn't assume, no one should assume that they're making decisions based on, furthering public health. No, they're furthering their own agenda. And we know what these people want. They want to embarrass the Alberta government more than anything else. Oh, here we go. Here's the meme, which was sent out in a memo, and all the reporters got it. This is from CTV. Alana Smith, the Canadian Press. Boiling point. Alberta doctors warn of health system collapse as COVID-19 cases climb. Ooh, things are very bad, says Dr. Shazma Mithani. Dire situation. Ooh, triage. Okay, well, let's look at it here. Alberta Health Services, the province's healthcare provider, said in a statement Wednesday there were 258 intensive care beds in the province, which includes 85 added spaces. It said intensive care unit capacity sat at 87%, just slightly below a 7-day average of 91%. As mentioned previously, from the 1990s onwards, neoliberal efficiency demanded that you don't have surplus built into systems like this. So they're looking for ICU units to have capacity of 95%. So you don't have doctors and nurses sitting around doing nothing, but still getting highly paid. I think this is very foolish, but that's the decision that they have made. So it would appear that the Alberta healthcare system is not on the verge of collapse, but that's what we're going to hear. And apparently Jason Kenney wants people to die. So let's look at the statistics for Alberta. These are the very latest statistics at the end of September the 9th. Current hospitalizations, 686. Current ICU, 169. Keep in mind that the province of Alberta is 4.4 million people. Now, it strikes me that a province with a population of 4.4 million people, perhaps 258 ICU care beds is not sufficient. You could always increase the number of beds. 2,444 deaths, total deaths. That's in over a year and a half. Last year before COVID, 26,000 people died in Alberta in 1 year. But no, apparently this is the apocalypse. Apparently this is apocalypse. And here's a data point that you're not going to hear very often. Average age of death, 80 years. 80 years. Oh, no, but all of these young people and all these kids are dying. These are lies. These are absolute lies. Now, when one looks at the number of people who have been vaccinated in Alberta, added to the number of people who have had and survived COVID, I should think that the province is close to herd immunity, but we've been told that that's a chimera. Oh, and it's happening. Advisory body recommends third COVID-19 vaccine dose for some immunocompromised Canadians. Can't get enough of that vax. And what's the saying? Make hay while the sun shines. This is from newsnation.now. Bobby Oler. Moderna announced it's developing a hybrid vaccine that would provide protection against COVID-19 and influenza. It's like the old, Certs commercial? It's a candy mint and it's a breath mint. Today, we're announcing the first step in our novel respiratory vaccine program with the development of a single-dose vaccine that combines a booster against COVID-19 and a booster against flu, as Stéphane Bancel, Moderna's chief executive officer, said in a statement. The company has not gotten approval or authorization for its standalone flu shot yet and only began a phase 1/2 study for it in July. Well, these are the days of warp speed. And apparently governments around the world now work for big pharma. Okay, here's another member, the monstrous regiment of women. This is the chief, New South Wales, that's in Australia, Health Minister Dr. Carey, lockdown, a globalist. We will be looking what contact tracing looks like in the New World Order. Yeah, she actually said that in a press conference. They are acting everywhere in the West as if, all of the rules have been tossed aside. We can do whatever we want, and we're not even going to bother to try and hide it anymore. Because what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Don't pipe up too loudly, or we'll ruin you, or maybe we'll arrest you. This is from dailyskeptic.org, formerly Lockdown Skeptics. Backbench rebellion brewing over plans to vaccinate kids. That is in England. And from the Babylon Bee, man disguises self as illegal immigrant so Democrats won't care that he's unvaccinated. It's funny because it's true. There's a guest post by retired dentist and Daily Skeptic contributor Dr. Mark Shaw, who says that just as dentists are taught to intervene as little as possible and trust the human body, public health experts should heed the same lesson. Specifically, we should have trusted our immune systems. Pfizer preparing to seek approval for its COVID vaccine in 5 to 11-year-olds. Now, I joked a few days ago that soon the experts will be demanding that children be vaccinated, maybe double, triple vaccinated, in utero. Chris Whitty, expert, says children should be vaccinated to benefit their mental health. He's the chief medical officer for England. Let's go back to the chat. Okay. Pineapple? Maybe using triggering phrases like that is another way to provoke the action we want. Red sulfur. Mom does get clingy. She's always been that way. Kontiki Roulette says, I follow their line when asked about Antifa. It's just an idea. Same as, the C disease or virus. Kontiki Roulette says, Biden's speech shows that theory about Australia being the beta test for the U.S. proves to be exactly true once again. Vape version coming, says Dennis Dale. A vape version of the vaccine? Oscar Toe says, I'm not certain, but it does seem the latest Biden speech was too much for even the worst pushovers in the GOP. I'm losing patience with you. What were you talking to? A 4-year-old? But I guess we used to be all God's children. Now Americans are all Biden's children. Red Sulfur says Michel Foucault died of septicemia from bathhouse BDSM acquired in San Francisco. The stuff that was going on in these places, there was a scandal in Toronto over an activity that took place on a stage, naked men on a stage, doing something to themselves. And people in the audience, these are all male homosexuals. I'm not going to say more than that because it is unbelievably disgusting and almost unbelievable. But it's true. And the police raided the place, and the gay community took up arms, and I believe there were apologies. Last year's photo of baby getting baptized by masked priest 6 feet away with squirt gun. Why would you bother, says David Wright. Yes, that was just appalling, absolutely appalling. Quachalango says, press one of KMG considered reflections on his relative who was mayor of New York City is long overdue. You mean William Russell Grace? William Hicks says, my local choir met this past week for the first time since last year. They've decided to sing while wearing masks, which cannot possibly sound good or be healthy. Needless to say, I wasn't there. I suppose people could decide, we're going to sing without masks. And, if you're worried about being infected from droplets, don't stand close to the choir. But of course we can't let people do that anymore. Kind of gross, KG. I thought you'd be a stickler for hygiene, says Radayan Raskolnikov. I don't know what that is a reference to. I really don't know. Hygiene? What? You see anything hygienic? Okay. All right. Now we're going to talk about, Canadian politics. I know how you love to hear about Canadian politics. It's the most thrilling politics on earth. Everyone says the same things. Everyone believes the same things. Well, except for one man. His name is Maxime Bernier. He is the leader of the People's Party of Canada. And here is an ECOS poll from September the 8th. Latest support, Liberal Party, 31%, Conservative Party, 34%, NDP, 16%, Green Party, 4%, Bloc Québécois, 4%, People's Party of Canada, 11%. Of course, Bernier was not allowed to speak at any of the three debates, the last one of which was last night. And of course, there were three debates. Two of them were in French, despite the fact that Quebec represents, I believe, 22% of the population. It really lets you know who's in charge. Bernier comments, it's so distressing to be a fringe party with no support at all, not being invited to debates with the big guys, media ignoring you. Maybe I should just give up, eh? Well, the media is coming to the rescue here. This is from Elizabeth Thompson of CBC. Bernier's talk of tyranny echoes far-right militia group slogans, say experts. PPC spokesperson says the leader had no idea he had been using a phrase similar to 3%ers slogan. Oh yeah, the 3%ers, that white nationalist threat that you've never heard of and you've never seen any members, because I don't know how many of them are there in the world. 50? I don't know. People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier has been using a phrase in speeches and in tweets similar to one used by members of a far-right militia group, some of whom participated in the storming of the Capitol building in Washington earlier this year. Experts who monitor online extremism say Bernier's repeated use of the phrase, when tyranny becomes law, revolution becomes our duty, could be interpreted by members of some far-right extremist groups like the 3%ers as an endorsement. Oh dear, that is just the worst possible thing that could happen. In June, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government added the 3%ers to Canada's list of terrorist entities. 3%ers often use the phrase, when tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes our duty. A spokesperson for Bernier said the party leader had no idea that the phrase he's been using for months. A paraphrase of a quote often attributed to Thomas Jefferson is nearly identical to one used by 3%ers. Well, it was very popular for decades, certainly when I was a younger man, to speak a quotation which was attributed to John F. Kennedy. Now, there seems to be some doubt whether he ever said this, but many people thought that he did and agreed. Kennedy supposedly said, when peaceful protest becomes impossible, violent revolution becomes inevitable. Yes, that far-right extremist John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And let's get to the experts here. Elizabeth Simons, Deputy Director of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, said the phrase, using the word rebellion rather than revolution, is strongly associated with the American 3%er movement. It's been used all over by far-right movements, including the current COVID conspiracy movement. It's insurrectionist speak, and as a signal to Bernier's followers, he's courting the conspiratorial far and racist right would-be insurrectionists. I will point out yet again that as far as I've been able to tell, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network is an AstroTurf organization. I could not find. I searched assiduously for a financial statement from them. But as far as I can tell, their only significant source of funding is from the government of Canada. So how very convenient to have an organization which is funded by Justin Trudeau's government say, in effect, that supporters of Maxime Bernier, and perhaps Maxime Bernier himself, is a neo-Nazi. Golly, nothing untoward there. Barbara Perry, director of Ontario Tech University Center on Hate, Bias, and Extremism, said Bernier's message appeals to members of groups like the Three Percenters who have a siege mentality that their rights are being stripped away. You see, if you complain about your rights being stripped away, for instance, your right to go outside and watch the cherry trees blossom, then you are a neo-Nazi. Yes. It's not that tweet in isolation, said Perry. Even his TV ads played to some of the same narratives about freedom and choice and defense. Oh dear, such ugly words. So it really is pandering to folks who originally his base, who seem to have come back as well. Oh no, we can't. Oh, and we have, Alexander Reed Ross, a doctoral fellow with the Center for the Analysis of the Radical Right in the U.S., said Bernier's message would appeal to those attracted to the Three Percenters. Yes, I don't know if Adolf Hitler ever said that people should brush their teeth. You could get a spokesperson from the American Dental Association to say that, yes, definitely, I agree that people should brush their teeth. And you see how the dentists and the Nazis are in it together. Of course, Elizabeth Thompson never bothered to, find an expert. There are still some people in this country who believe in free speech to counter the three other experts. No, because the CBC doesn't do that sort of thing anymore. Balance. Oh, and here's another one from Nicole Bogart at CTV News. Known white nationalists, far-right groups are among election protest organizers. Expert says, oh, wait, here we go again, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Wow, this woman must be on standby. According to Simons, many of the prominent voices involved in this movement can be traced back to the 2017 protests over M103, a motion that called on the House of Commons to condemn Islamophobia. Yeah, whatever that means. Whatever that means. Bad actors, actual neo-Nazis, white nationalists, and hate group members. Yeah, have you seen the crowds at Bernier's rallies? His rallies are bigger than anyone's, They're bigger than anyone's. And they're certainly not dressed like neo-Nazis, as far as I can tell. And here's another piece from American Thinker. This is from Andrew Coy. Let it find us. Whether because we are being lied to or those in power are inept, Americans are increasingly filled with COVID dread. He writes, let it find us. If the virus finds us, let us find us living our lives. Let it find us raising our children. Let it find us working hard and playing harder. Let it find us living and not cowering. Let it find us shouting from the rooftops, not cowering in the corner. Let it find us at a fully attended family reunion. Let it find us drinking a beer with an old army buddy. Let it find us swapping tall tales with old high school friends. Let it find us on the front porch, not in the basement. Let it find us on the tractor, keeping the rows straight or clearing out the beaver dams so the crops don't flood. Let it find us cleaning the stables. If the virus is to find us, let it find us being Americans and not trolls of a dystopian authoritarian regime. Let it find us singing in the church choir, going to Sunday school, or sitting in our normal pew at church. Let it find us at the kids' ball games, attending the school spelling bee, at cheerleading practice, filling up the tank with gas, or having the grandchildren spending the night. Here. I thought that I would answer some viewer mail. I get these. I'm just laughing at the caricature. If you go to the videos page of the KMG Show YouTube channel, you get a fuller version of it. So let's see what people had to say. Comments. Lily Schuler wrote, Texas Feral Hog said, If you can get by with being vaccinated, you have the responsibility to risk your life by not being vaccinated. That's the nitty-gritty of it, isn't it? The more ruthless the mandates get, the more they need to be fought. Comments on my show, Pete Sprague. No, there weren't any. Pissure de copy. Lamprey Milt says, hope you cover the Vancouver model someday. It's fascinating. Is that a reference to Vancouver becoming like Hong Kong? We're an empire now, and this is from Vienna Chronist. We're an empire now, when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously, as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out, where history's actors and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. I believe that was a official of the George W. Bush administration. Was that Karl Rove? Okay. That's the sort of madness they believe in. Oh, Labor Day Miracle. Yes, this is a reference to me doing a show on Monday of this week. Southside Dude 101 said, Kevin, your observation of feminist on feminist reminded me that it's time to revisit the oeuvre of Sylvia Kristen, the immortal Emmanuel. Okay. Very sort of 70s observation. And Lamprey Milt again. Nicholas Lofton Hexam is my favorite musical composer of the modern era. He's often overlooked because of his dreadful lyrical skills, but the use of offbeats and syncopations is something to be admired and respected. He learned classical piano at 7 years old. Bono and Edge are great also, but I think that has to do with Eno in the background pulling the levers. Sherble Furbles says, just watch the Razor Fist Begun. The comic film Crash has a rant video. It's peaked. The one time they were able to create some genuine depth of character was with the villain in the movie Thanos, well, when he won, but of course they undid this in the next one. It's all been downhill since, in a consequence-free universe, rendered an endless reset cartoon. Snapping away half the population solved all the enviro issues they love to complain about, as well as making the hero's victory one of undoing progress. They couldn't honestly deal with that aftermath, so all that's left is empty spectacle. Since everything visual is easily possible now, it's just become boring. I look at something else or skip ahead of many action scenes, especially when the 90-pound women get punchy. It's just too patronizing. CGI has not proved to be very good at depicting action. There's a lack of depth there, It's very good for, Billy Crystal's movie 61, taking a stadium in Detroit and making it look like Yankee Stadium in 1961. Yeah, it works that way. But again, yesterday I was discussing a Playtime by Jacques Tati, and real sets. You can't beat real sets. There's just, that they're real, and you see people touching them. In these cubicles, which are circular, that you have to see these office workers working in, they have like shelves built into the outside of them, which you see them pulling out. It's tremendous. Should we self-dox? Colin Colenso says Aussies are talking to each other, not online so much, and the general trend is wishing for most government representatives to encounter misfortunes. Southside Dude 101 says, I get the impression the sailor, that'd be Steve Sailor, is a bit of a hypochondriac. And I'll take one more look at comments. And there aren't any for this one. Oh, that's because I had to split that one up in two because YouTube crashed on me. Seven Costanza says, KMG, you should contact Imperium Press to see if they'll publish a transcript of your movie reviews. They would have to be heavily worked over. Heavily. Someone with a Chinese name, which is in Chinese characters, and I think this fellow has a little archive of bits of mine from the Luke show. suggesting that I replace Greg Johnson as the resident movie reviewer on Uns. He was trashing Colonel Blimp recently, perhaps because he's a homosexual. I, he didn't like Colonel Blimp, eh? Perhaps he simply hates Englishmen. It's possible. It's possible. And, okay. I think I'll skip Joseph Tainter for today because we got about 40 minutes left on the show. And I have to talk about 9/11, the 20th anniversary of which is tomorrow. So people ask the question, where were you when 9/11 happened? Well, I was asleep in my bed in Victoria, where I had moved a month before Vancouver. And I was awakened by a phone call. I don't know, it was 9 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And it was an old friend and colleague of mine who I'd worked with at Alberta Report. And she was then living in Portland, Oregon, where her husband was at school. And she was frantic, saying, that the Twin Towers in New York City have, they've been bombed by airplanes and they collapsed. And I thought, that's not true. How could that happen? And she was frantic because another colleague of ours who had worked as our editor, he lived in New York City. So she was worried about him. So, this was the first thing I heard in the morning, and I was groggy, and it all sounded fantastic and rather hysterical. So, I said goodbye and then turned on CNN, and I looked at it, and well. And after the initial shock and disbelief had subsided, this is the world that we live in now. And I thought nothing good will come of this. And nothing good did come of it. The Bush administration used this as an excuse for, we can surveil you all the time. You have no privacy left anymore. And we're going to make, airports nightmarish or even more nightmarish than they were before. And you're on the side of you're on our side, or you're on the side of the terrorists. And freedom fries. And let's invade the world and impose democracy on them at the point of a gun. And I mentioned AIDS, and I thought that the homosexuals were going to get it in the neck. After 9/11, I thought I wouldn't like to be a Muslim in the United States now, or maybe anywhere in the Western world. But exactly the opposite happened. And George W. Bush was leading the way. George W. Bush celebrating Ramadan in the White House. George W. Bush saying that the Koran was integral to American culture as the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount. Can you imagine that? He actually said that. And Bush giving a speech, I forget whether it was at the I think it was his speech at the National Cathedral, or maybe it was his second inaugural address, where he sounded like a deranged revolutionary from a Dostoevsky novel. All bad. Yes, again, let's bomb the hell out of these countries, and let's invite the survivors to live among us and hope that they don't bear a grudge. Pat Buchanan, of course, was right about this, as he's been right about the economy. And he writes in a syndicated column, when the hijacked planes hit the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, and the Pentagon, that first 9/11, the Taliban were in control of Afghanistan and providing sanctuary for Al-Qaeda. Today, the Taliban are in control of Afghanistan and providing sanctuary to Al-Qaeda. What then did our longest war accomplish? The Afghan army and government we stood up and sustained for decades has collapsed. The U.S. military has withdrawn. U.S. citizens and thousands of Afghans who fought alongside us have been left behind. The triumphant Taliban of today are far stronger than were the Taliban of 2001, who fled at the approach of the Northern Alliance. Al-Qaeda is now present in many more countries than it was when we first launched the global war on terror. Nor is the America of 2021 the hubristic, self-confident country of George W. Bush and the neocons, who are going to convert the Middle East into something like our Middle West and advance from there with the ultimate goal of ending tyranny in our world. David Frum went further. He wrote a book, he may have co-written a book, calling for an end of evil in the world. This is just absolutely demented. Is he founding a new religion? Oh, no, we don't need evil. Evil is not a part of humanity. I mean, how is this guy not laughed? Not just out of his profession, but, out of the country. In any event, Buchanan continues, call the roll. Afghanistan is a lost cause, receding again into the darkness. Saddam Hussein is long gone, but the Iraq we invaded to strip of weapons of mass destruction it did not have is now dominated by Iranian-backed Shiite militia. Only at the sufferance of the Baghdad regime are 2,500 so-called non-combat U.S. troops permitted to hang on. Syria, where we intervened to support anti-Assad rebels and retain 900 U.S. troops, is a human rights hellhole. Bashar Hafez al-Assad is victorious in a civil war thanks to Russian, Iranian, Hezbollah intervention on his behalf. The million Syrian refugees who fled west during that civil war have helped to turn Lebanon into a failed state. Actually, I think it was a failed state before that. In Libya, where Barack Obama's air attacks helped bring down the regime of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, Russians, Turks, and Egyptians battle for control. The Americans are nowhere to be found. Despite our support for Saudi airstrikes that turned Yemen into a second humanitarian disaster, Houthi rebels still control the north of the country and the capital, Sana'a. Looking back at the half-dozen Mideast wars in which we have engaged since that first 9/11, where are we better off now than we were then? Looking forward, where do Americans go from here? How do we sustain all the commitments that have bled and drained us for 20 years while our adversaries and enemies appear to be growing stronger, while our own claim to being the world's last superpower is increasingly subject to challenge? Like Donald Trump before him, Joe Biden appears to be giving up on nation building, pulling our troops out of the Middle East, staying out of its future wars, and addressing the challenges of China. But how long can we defend a Europe that refuses to defend itself from a Russia that is stronger and more assertive than it was 2 decades ago when Vladimir Putin succeeded the feckless Boris Yeltsin? In the Arctic, Baltic, Belarus, Ukraine, and the Black Sea, Putin is more assertive and Russia less intimidated than it was in 2001. Only 1 in 3 NATO countries meets the commitment to spend 2% of GDP on defense, as Europeans today identify immigration as the major threat to the continent. Among the malingerers is the Germany of Angela Merkel, retiring chancellor, who approved the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that will soon double Germany's dependence on Russia for natural gas. How long can the U.S. sustain its new policy of containment of Xi Jinping's China? How long can we contain China's expansion in the South and East China Sea at the expense of the Philippines, Japan, and Taiwan? Looking back and looking ahead, the trend line is not good. I suppose, that's why you don't get involved in foolish wars, particularly more than one at a time. This is the sort of story, which they call in the business a why story. It's printed to make people's blood boil, but now it's just, meh, what are you going to do? This is from Luke Rosiak at Daily Wire. A school board member whose father was on the board of the mosque attended by 9/11 hijackers and hired as imam a top al-Qaeda operative on Wednesday forcefully opposed a resolution honoring the victims of the attacks. Abrar Omaish is on the school board of Fairfax County Public Schools because of course she is, near the Pentagon. She lives with her father, Issam, who was the director of the Dar al-Khiraj Mosque in Falls Church, Virginia, and hired as its imam Anwar al-Awlaki, who President Barack Obama later ordered killed by drone strike. The mosque was attended by 2 of the 9/11 hijackers, as well as the shooter in the 2009 attack on Fort Hood, Texas. She said a school board resolution calling for a moment of silence marking the 20th anniversary of 9/11 was not, quote, anti-racist, unquote. While 9/11 was jarring and a historic turning point in our nation's history, she said the resolution failed to address state-sponsored traumas to Muslims. Just 2 years ago, even I was profiled as a threat. Oh, dear. In one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, she said. That refers to an incident in which she was pulled over by the police for running a red light. then removed from her car for repeatedly refusing to show her license. Video shows an obvious traffic infraction and that the officer could not see her appearance when he pulled her over. And of course, the obvious question is, why are these people here in our countries? Any of them. And, oh, yeah, okay. Let's see. This again from the American Conservative. 9/11 and the Mirage of American Democracy. It's by James Bovard. And it asks the question, what did Saudi Arabia have to do with 9/11? And why don't we know about this after 20 years? Well, I guess it's kind of like the third secret of Fatima, that when you keep a secret that close for so long, it must be pretty bad stuff. And so it would seem. So it would seem. I'm going to be moving on to the book club shortly. But before we do, let's have a look at the chat. Red Sulfur says, I love Russian TV. It is so unapologetically white. Let's see. There's no reason for Russia to come into conflict with the U.S. Cold War ended in 1989. Says, see if this is absolutely true. But Gorbachev arranged for the removal of nuclear weapons from the Warsaw Pact countries after he got a promise from the United States that NATO would not expand to the Russian border. And of course, that was broken, continues to be broken. And the NATO response, why does this organization exist anymore? That's not their response, is, what are you going to do about it? Which is a very foolish thing to say to a well-armed country like Russia, which has nuclear weapons. Putin wants peace with the West, but we have decided to drive him into the arms of China, which is the most disastrous foreign policy decision made by any major Western country since Britain, in 1936-37, decided to drive Mussolini into the arms of Hitler over Abyssinia. Yes, over Abyssinia, as if anyone cared. Quachulongo says, could slice right through the nonsense. Them were the days. Buchanan on PBS with the last word. Is that the McLaughlin group? Yes, I remember when Pat Buchanan was on CNN regularly, when Bob Novak was on CNN regularly. Those were the days. Of course, Buchanan went to MSNBC, and he published a book about demographic change in the West, which was thought to be so horrendous that he was fired, and he was replaced with the Reverend Al Sharpton, a man who fomented actual, honest to God, pogroms in New York City. That's fine. But talking about demographic change in America is not. Caligula 138 says Sam Francis influenced Buchanan a lot. No question about that. And I don't think that Pat would disagree. Your mama says, I'm so tired of these people who can only imagine Russo-American relations as zero-sum. Amusingly, the Russians were on our side in both world wars. Of course, Serbia was on our side on both world wars too, but we decided to make a terrible example of them in 1999 and set up a radical Muslim narco state in Europe. Okay. He drove people crazy. I'm going to put a padlock on the door of the NEA. Hello to Kyle Free. David Wright says, I have 5 Buchanan books, met him twice. I have to admit that Pat Buchanan is one of the few people, celebrities in the world that I would very much like to meet. After he won the 1996 New Hampshire primary, the Republican Party leadership, everyone held a press conference on the Capitol steps to denounce him, probably worse than anything experienced by Trump. I was told a story once about the night of the New Hampshire primary in 1996. I had a party at my house. I'm not much of a party giver, but I thought that something great might happen. And it did. So Scott McConnell, one of the founders of the American Conservative, along with Tackey and aforementioned Pat Buchanan, he wanted to have a poll of the guests at this rather swanky party. And he was advised by a friend of mine not to do it. No, don't even think about it. Just stop. Why? Because Norman Podhoretz and his wife were at the party, and if they got wind of this, they would make a terrible scene and storm out and say God knows what afterwards. You see just how circumscribed the so-called conservative movement in the United States was, even in 1996. Yes, saying America first, Pat Buchanan, that's just akin to what the Nazis said, apparently. So I am going to move on to the book club here. And this book I'm talking about is one of the most famous memoirs ever written about one of the greatest events in human history, which was the Spanish conquest of Mexico. And the book is by Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who was there, who was in the area even before Cortez, and he marched. He sailed with Cortez, and he marched all the way to Mexico City. They suffered their terrible reverse and had to flee the city, and then regrouped and captured the capital of one of the greatest empires that the world has ever seen. Castillo was born in the year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, 1492, and he died at 1584. I should say that I was working from the Penguin edition of this book, which was translated by J.M. Cohen, which is rather more than a translation, because as Cohen explains, Diaz was not a professional author, and he was no great stylist, and his memoir is prone to repetition and long lists of things which completely shipwreck the narrative, and some pointless discursions. But Diaz, he was determined to tell the truth. There had been the equivalent of hagiographies that had been written about Cortez, and Diaz always believed Cortez to be a great man, but he thought that the truth was better than lies. And of course, he is right. J.M. Cohen, who lived from 1903 to 1989, was a rather remarkable man. He was not headed for he wasn't an academic, although he had graduated from Cambridge. He was just a schoolmaster, and he decided to teach himself various languages, first Spanish and Russian. And this led to first English translations of Boris Pasternak. And he translated Don Quixote for Penguin, and then decided to go into a translation full time. That he was one of the editors of the Penguin Classics series. He has translated Jorge Luis Borges, Octavio Paz, Carlos Fuentes, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Rousseau, Rabelais, Saint Teresa of Avila, Montaigne, Teilhard de Chardin, Christopher Columbus, and he was also a significant editor. Books which many people, I'm sure some people listening, would have or once had: the Penguin Dictionary of Modern Quotations and the New Penguin Dictionary of Quotations. He edited several books of comic and curious verse, as well as biographies of Browning, Maund, Robert Graves, Borges, and a history of Western literature, English translators and translations, a study of the Baroque lyric, and Journeys Down the Amazon, being the extraordinary adventures and achievements of the early Europeans. And I say, this is a remarkable memoir, but also invaluable for the historian. Now, Prescott, of course, whose book on Conquest of Mexico is one of the all-time classics, greatly benefited from Bernal Diaz. Prescott was, he was a synthesizer, and it is Prescott's book which I would point you to, because it is immortal. There's a recent modern book by Hugh Thomas, who's very good on the Spanish Empire, which I would recommend as well. So let's get into Cohen's introduction. Oh, he says, he quotes Prescott in terms on which I could not hope to improve. Bernal Diaz, the untutored child of nature, is a most true and literal copyist of nature. He transfers the scenes of real life by a sort of daguerreotype process, if I may say so, to his pages. He is among chroniclers what Defoe is among novelists. He introduces us into the heart of the camp. We huddle round the bivouac with the soldiers, loiter with them on their wearisome marches, listen to their stories, their murmurs of discontent, their plans of conquest, their hopes, their triumphs, their disappointments. All the picturesque scenes and romantic incidents of the campaign are reflected in his page as in a mirror. The lapse of 50 years has no power over the spirit of the veteran. Yes, I should mention that Bernal Diaz wrote this book when he was in his 80s, when he was nearly blind and deaf, and he was close to death, and he had given up on the book because he thought it would be too difficult to continue, but he managed to finish it to our eternal gratitude. But Cohen gets at something that is significant in terms of how one looks at the conquistadors. Prescott writes, he is still a soldier of the cross, and those who fell by his side in the fight were martyrs for the faith. Who are now my companions, he asks. They have fallen in battle or been devoured by the cannibal or been thrown to fatten the wild beasts in their cages. They whose remains should rather have been gathered under monuments emblazoned with their achievements, which deserve to be commemorated in letters of gold, for they died in the service of God and of his majesty, and to give light to those who sat in darkness, and also to acquire that wealth which most men covet. Prescott argues the last motive, thus tardily and incidentally expressed, may be thought by some to furnish a better key than either of the preceding to the conduct of the conquerors. It is, at all events, a specimen of that naivete which gives an irresistible charm to the old chronicler, and which, in spite of himself, unlocks his bosom, as it were, and lays it open to the eye of the reader. J.M. Cohen comments, it is not surprising that an American Protestant should suspect the honesty of the Spaniards' crusading spirit. Notwithstanding the horrible decadence of the Aztec religion, the deeds of the conquerors, which included massacre, torture, and forcible conversion, were not by 19th century standards very much better. Yet, as one reads Bernal Diaz, one credits him and his comrades with a true sense of mission. One sees that by their own standards, they were often behaving with moderation. On several occasions, the Mercedarian friar, Bernal Diaz seems to have forgotten his name, urged Cortes to restrain his proselytizing zeal. And it must not be forgotten, as Prescott points out, that disbelief in Christianity, whether by conviction or from ignorance, was in that age punishable by burning. Now, Cortes began his conquest in 1520. In 1492, Columbus not only sailed the ocean blue, but Grenada was captured. And thus, after 700-year fight, Spain was finally Christian again. Grenada was the last Moorish holdout. The Moors were expelled from Spain, as were the Jews. And Ferdinand and Isabel, the great Christian majesties, were undoubtedly devout Catholics, and I mean truly devout, not in the sense that we mean now. And Spain at that time was suffused with a sense of mission, that having reclaimed Spain, that the rest of the world could be claimed for Christianity. There is no question in my mind of the sincerity of Cortez and Bernal Diaz in this regard. Yes, they wanted gold. Well, who wouldn't? Soldiers were not paid in those days. So they took what they could through plunder or through trade. And one is rather amazed or amused how much gold the Indians in Mexico gave to the Spaniards in exchange for colored beads, colored glass beads. Because the Indians, I guess they were bored with gold, bored with silver. They just couldn't get enough colored glass beads. I mean, it's tempting to mock them, but we are in no position in our day to mock the appeal of novelty. Not at all. Whenever the Spaniards, whenever they set out on a journey or they went into battle, this was always preceded by a mass. So Diaz begins with a preliminary note. I have observed that before beginning to write their histories, the most famous chroniclers compose a prologue in exalted language in order to give luster and repute to their narrative and to whet the curious reader's appetite. But I, being no scholar, dare not attempt any such preface. For properly to extol the adventures that befell us and the heroic deeds we performed during the conquest of New Spain and its provinces in the company of that valiant and enterprising captain, Don Hernando Cortez, who as a reward for his heroism was afterwards created Marquess del Val, would require eloquence and rhetoric far greater than mine. What I myself saw and the fighting in which I took part, with God's help, I will describe quite plainly as an honest eyewitness, without twisting the facts in any way. I am now an old man, over 84 years of age, and have lost both sight and hearing, and unfortunately I have gained no wealth to leave to my children and descendants, except this true story, which is a most remarkable one, as my readers will presently see. Well, you know, the naivete that Prescott speaks of, and this belief that the Catholicism of the conquistadors was phony, was an ex post facto justification for their conquest and looting of the Mexican Empire. This is an example of the vast gulf that separates the people of 500 years ago from the people today. That people regard religion mostly as extrinsic now. Oh, that it is something, oh, yes, you can say of me this, you can say of me this, you can say of me this. The Spaniards didn't think that way. It was intrinsic to them. It was intrinsic to the way that they looked at themselves, they looked at others, that they looked at the world. Everything they were was filtered through the prism of Catholicism. Now, we hear again and again from Bernal Diaz that the Spaniards were genuinely shocked and horrified and disgusted by the human sacrifices of the Indian tribes, particularly the Aztecs. And again, you know, there are statements made about the extent, the depravity, the incredible depravity, the lust for human flesh, the lust to vivisect people, to keep their skulls, and to consume their limbs. And oh, this was much, much exaggerated. No, it was not exaggerated. And it turns out that it was all true. But of course now, well, who are we to judge them? Who are we to judge them? Well, I mean, even the depraved people that we are today can judge them. We can judge them very harshly, because this sort of behavior, and I have to say that this sort of behavior is perhaps not as depraved as the Aztecs, was common to all of the Indians of North America. And despite, oh, they lived at one with nature and each other. No, all of the Indians of North America, before the white man came and for some time after the white man came, were engaged just routinely in slavery, torture, and genocide. Here's something from the book, a portent. When Cortez was made Captain General of the fleet, one day, when Diego was on his way to Mass, and as governor he was escorted to church by the most distinguished men in the town, he called Hernando Cortez to walk on his right as a sign of honor. Then a buffoon called the Mad Cervantes ran in front of him, making grimaces and jokes and crying, "Way for Don Diego, the procession of Don Diego, Don Diego, Don Diego. What a captain you have chosen, Don Diego, a captain from Medellin and Estremadura, a very valiant captain. But take care, Diego, or he may run off with your fleet, for he knows how to look after himself, as everybody can tell you." And he shouted more nonsense as well, all with a spice of malice in it. Andres de Duero, who was walking on the governor's other side, gave him a couple of slaps to make him stop. "Be quiet, you drunken fool," he said, "and stop your tricks. This so-called wit of yours is nothing but malice, and we know very well you didn't invent it yourself either." But the more Duero slapped him, the more persistently the fool went on. "Long live Don Diego! Way for my master Don Diego and his bold captain. And let me tell you, friend Diego, I'd rather go off with him to these new rich lands than stay behind and watch you weeping over the bad bargain you made your day. There is no doubt that some of Velasquez's relatives," yes, quote, end quote. Diaz comments, "There is no doubt that some of Velasquez's relatives had given the buffoon a gold piece or two to utter his spite in the guise of wit. Moreover, all that he said came true, as they say the utterances of fools sometimes do. Yet the choice of Hernando Cortez certainly served to exalt our holy faith and benefit his majesty, as I shall presently relate." The Indians had never seen anyone like the Spaniards, and the Spaniards had never seen anyone like the Indians. And there was sort of mutual incomprehension and terror. But again and again, we find in Bernal Diaz just this overwhelming incomprehension, disgust for the religious practices, the grotesque religious practices of the Indians. On observing the justice of our behavior and hearing the kind words that Cortez addressed to them through our interpreters, the caciques and papas of Pasinga became well disposed towards us. After hearing Cortez's customary exposition of our holy faith and his injunctions to give up human sacrifice and robbery and the foul practice of sodomy and to cease worshiping their accursed idols, also much other good advice that he gave him, they at once called together the people of the neighboring towns. These people then swore obedience to his majesty and very soon began to make the same grievous complaints against Montezuma that Sempolians had when we were at Cuyahuitzlan. Yes. Idols, these grotesque idols, and they would find these altars and everything around it just swimming in blood. Here's another example. We advanced this way until we came to some brush-colored hillocks. Then the cacique, those are the Indian chiefs, started shouting to some bands of warriors whom he had placed in ambush to kill us. In response to the cacique's call, these bands quickly fell on us with great fury and began to shoot with such accuracy that the first flight of arrows wounded 13 soldiers. The Indians wore armor made of cotton, which reached down to their knees. They carried lances and shields, bows and arrows, slings, and many stones. And after the arrow flights, with their feathered crests waving, they attacked us hand to hand. Wielding their lances in both hands, they did us great damage. But thanks to God, when they felt the sharp edge of our swords and the effect of our crossbows and muskets, they quickly took to their heels, leaving 15 dead on the field. A little beyond this place where they attacked us was a small square with 3 houses built of masonry, which served as cues or prayer houses. These contained many idols of baked clay, some with demons' faces, some with women's, and others equally ugly, which seemed to represent Indians committing sodomy with one another. Inside the houses were some small wooden chests containing other idols and some discs, made partly of gold, but mainly of copper, also some pendants, 3 diadems, and other small objects in the shape of fishes and of the local ducks, all made of poor quality gold. When we saw the gold in the masonry houses, we were very pleased to have found such a country, for Peru had not yet been discovered, nor was it to be discovered for another 20 years. I mean, you can contrast Cortez with Pizarro. Cortez had a very genuine interest in the souls of the Indians, whereas there's a famous story of Pizarro that he was reproached by a priest for his beastliness to the Indians of Peru. And he responded, "Father, I have not come here to save their souls, but to steal their gold." We can learn a lot about, I don't know, leadership, dealing with different people, rivals from Cortez. He was exceedingly polite to these people because he saw that he would need their help. He didn't lord it over him as a representative of a superior civilization. Not at all. Not at all. He recognizes the circumstances where he found himself, that there were few of his lot, but a great many of theirs. So he complimented them. He gave them gifts. He puffed up their pride. But here, I'm going to read this passage. This is the final passage I'll read, which is where Cortez learns the secret to victory. Leaving him in this dangerous situation, let us return to Pedro de Alvarado, who, after advancing for about 3 miles, came to a creek which was very difficult to cross. It pleased God, therefore, that he should return by another track, which led near the place where Francisco de Luego was fighting. Hang on. It's this one. Here's the right passage. While these conversations were going on, 5 Indians came in great haste from the town to tell the caciques who were talking to Cortez that 5 of Montezuma's Mexican tax gatherers had just arrived. The caciques turned pale at the news. Trembling with fear, they left Cortez and went off to receive the Mexicans. Very quickly, they decorated a room with flowers, cooked them some food, and made them quantities of chocolate, which is the best of their drinks. When the 5 Mexicans entered the town, they came to the square where the caciques' houses and our quarters were, and passed us by with cocksure pride, speaking not a word to Cortez or anyone else they knew. They wore richly embroidered cloaks and loincloths, for they wore loincloths at that time, and shining hair that was gathered up and seemed tied to their heads. Each one was smelling the roses he carried, and each had a crooked staff in his hand. Their Indian servants carried fly whisks, and they were accompanied by the caciques of the other Teutonic towns, who did not leave them until they had shown them to their lodgings and given them a meal. As soon as they had dined, the tax gatherers sent for the fat cacique and the other chiefs and scolded them for having entertained us in their villages, since now they would have to meet and deal with us, which would not please their lord Montezuma. For without his permission and instructions, they should neither have received us nor given us gold and jewels. They continued to reproach the fat cacique and his nobles for their actions, and offered them to provide 20 Indians, male and female, as a peace offering to their gods for the wrong that had been done, that is, to be sacrificed, vivisected. At this point, Cortez asked our interpreters why the arrival of these Indians had so agitated the caciques and who they were. And Dona Marina, who is now defamed in Mexico as La Malinche, who understood perfectly, explained what had happened. As soon as Cortez understood what the caciques were saying, he reminded them that, as he had already explained, our Lord the King had sent him to chastise evildoers and prevent sacrifices and robbery. He ordered them, therefore, to arrest the tax gatherers for having made such a demand, and to hold them prisoners until their Lord Montezuma was informed of the reason, namely, that they had come to rob the Totonacs, to enslave their wives and children, and to do other violence. When the caciques heard this, they were appalled at his daring. To order them to manhandle Montezuma's messengers, they were far too frightened. They dared not do it. But Cortez insisted that they must arrest them at once, and they obeyed him. They secured them with long poles and collars, as is their custom, so that they could not escape. and they beat one of them who refused to be bound. Furthermore, Cortez ordered all the caciques to cease paying tribute and obedience to Montezuma and to proclaim their refusal in all the towns of their friends and allies, also to announce that if the tax gatherers came to any other towns, he must be informed and would send for them. So the news spread throughout the province, for the fat cacique immediately sent messengers to proclaim it, and the chiefs who had accompanied the tax gatherers scattered immediately after the arrest, each to his town, to convey the order and give an account of what had happened. The act they had witnessed was so astonishing and of such importance to them that they said that no human beings dared to do such a thing, and it must be the work of Tules. Therefore, from that moment, they called us Tules, which means gods or demons. To return to the prisoners, all the caciques were of the opinion that they ought to be sacrificed, so that none could return to Mexico to tell the tale. But Cortez said they should not be killed, and that he would take charge of them. He set a guard over them, and at midnight summoned the soldiers of this guard to instruct them, choose the 2 prisoners that seem to you the most intelligent, and loose them. Then bring them to my quarters, but do not let any of the village Indians see what you are doing. When the prisoners were brought before him, he asked them through our interpreters why they were prisoners and from what country they came, as if he knew nothing of the matter. They answered that the caciques of Zempoala had arrested them with the aid of their followers and ours, and had held them prisoner. Cortez replied that he knew nothing about this and was very sorry. He ordered food to be brought them and talked to them in a friendly way. He then told them to return at once to their lord Montezuma and tell him that we were all his good friends and entirely at his service. They were to explain also that he had released them for fear that harm should befall them, and had quarreled with the caciques who had arrested them. Furthermore, that he would do all he could to help them, and would see that their 3 companions were released and protected. He then told them to go off quickly and not come back to be captured and killed. The prisoners thanked him for his kindness, but said they were still afraid of falling into the hands of their enemies, since they could not help passing through their country. So Cortez ordered 6 sailors to take them in a boat during the night and put them ashore some 12 miles away on a friendly territory outside the boundaries of Zempoala. When next morning the fat cacique and the village chiefs saw that 2 prisoners were missing, they were more anxious to sacrifice the remaining 3. But Cortez got these 3 out of their clutches. Pretending to be furious at the escape of the other 2, he had a chain brought from the ships and bound them with it. Then he had them transported aboard, saying that as such a bad watch had been kept over the others, he would look after them himself. Once they were aboard, he had their chains taken off and told them in a very friendly way that he would soon send them back to Montezuma. After these events, the caciques of this village and of Zempoala and all the Totonac dignitaries who had assembled asked Cortez what was to be done, for all the forces of Mexico and of the great Montezuma would descend upon them, and they could not possibly escape death and destruction. Cortez replied with a most cheerful smile that he and his brothers who were with them would defend them and kill anyone who tried to harm them. And the caciques and their villagers, one and all, promised to stand by us, to obey any orders we might give them, and to join their forces with ours against Montezuma and all his allies. Then, in the presence of Diego de Godoy, the notary, they took the oath of obedience to his majesty and sent messengers to all the other towns in the province to relate what had happened. And they now paid no more tribute, and the tax gatherers had disappeared. They could not contain their delight at having thrown off the tyranny of the Mexicans. In addition, the conquistadors, the Spanish, did not share the horror of, say, the English and others at the idea of miscegenation. They didn't regard the people that they were conquering with horror. Well, they regarded the practices with horror, but they, as we've seen from what I have read, that they looked to be friendly with the Indians and not overbearing and condescending, and to enlist them as allies against their hated enemy, Montezuma, the head of the Aztec Empire. And this is, as I say, the second greatest story ever told. This is one of the most remarkable and important memoirs ever written, and it is thrilling to read. Even if one knows Prescott and Thomas, popular histories, it still remains thrilling and I cannot recommend it more highly. Again, Bernal Diaz, The True History of the Conquest of New Spain. So let's wrap it up here. Let's go to the chat. Dionysus says, if you want to amplify your signal, you send a super chat to Ramsey Paul. Get KMG mentioned enough to share the audience. He has a large audience. Okay. Emmett Kelly Zer says, Cortez burned his ships to shoreline. There was no going back to Spanish Cuba. It was forward all the way. There was a man. Indeed. Indeed. Again, as I said at the top of the show, looking back at the conquistadors of 500 years ago and what they did, such great suffering that one hardly believes that we are of the same species. Jim Smith says, I don't think Europe is particularly thrilled at the prospect of Islamification. Red Sulfur says, Saudi Arabia, Israel bromance. Dennis Dale comments, hot interfaith action. Well, you know, it's a curious thing. The Biden campaign let it be known, even before the election, that Trump administration was too close to Israel and they were going to pull back. Well, a remarkable thing that, since 1968, we've had the peace process, which has accomplished nothing. Well, Israel made a separate deal with Egypt. So Donald Trump bullies the countries in the region, and suddenly Israel is signing these peace treaties with various Arab countries, and this was thought absolutely impossible. That Trump moved the capital, the American embassy, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and the world is going to fall apart. No, that didn't happen. Trump showed strength, Biden has shown weakness, and we've seen the result. Okay. Ogun Zion said actual cannibalism was a thing, but most humans held it in horror, and human sacrifices weren't necessarily coupled with eating. Well, not necessarily. Bantu genocide of the other races of sub-Saharan Africa, still doing it, says Texas Feral Hog. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yes, the noble Indians of Canada. Well, maybe we should ask the Huron about that. No, we can't, because they were genocided. And just tortures that one can barely speak of were just matter of fact with these people. Dennis Dale says, Atlantic slave trade may have spared many Africans from human sacrifice. Well, we never talk about the other way around. The Muslims took millions of white slaves, millions of them, and this never get mentioned because everyone knows that slavery only occurred in the United States of America. But as Heller Belloc pointed out, slavery is the default condition of humanity. Yo Mama says Bly's journey of 4,000 miles in an open boat has to be the third greatest story. Exactly. That is exactly my view. And I have talked about a history, Carolyn Alexander's book, The Bounty. I mean, again, this is a story which I have known for a long, long time. And if you read that book, one finds oneself gasping over and over again. This really happened? Well, indeed it is. And William Bly, one of my great heroes. So that's it for the week. What is coming up? On Theater Thursday, I'm going to be talking about Paul Verhoeven's delightful Starship Troopers. On the book club, I am going to be talking about, primitive people again. Robert Edgerton's Six Societies. Edgerton was an anthropologist at UCLA, and he wrote this book as a riposte to cultural relativism. And on Music Monday, I'm going to be talking about the child ballads, which are English and sometimes American adaptations of English folk poems, and how they have been translated to music by many different hands. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. If you'd like to donate to this live stream, which I could genuinely, desperately use right now, no exaggeration, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made directly to the live stream via Interact through kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.